speaker for this evening is Steve Marks. So Steve, come on up. I haven't even said anything yet, so I got some good start.
We know. We're encouraging.
Thank you. Appreciate
We know you'll dazzle us.
it. That is my intent. So, the title of my presentation today is U.S. Scott 491, My Story, and really most importantly, what that means to you, or what you can benefit by this information. And I truly, honestly believe that I'm going to say some things and give some resources in the next 17 to 20 minutes that's going to help you on your philatelic stamp journey, whether you're a beginner stamp collector, an intermediate collector, or an advanced collector, or if you're a dealer. I believe you're going to take something away today. Now, I do have some sheets that Katie is going to hand out towards the end of my presentation that's going to have some of the specific information and some of the things that I'm going to be referencing on it. I don't know if I printed enough of them, to be honest. If you didn't get one, if you want one, just let me know and I can either email it to you or send a text to you of it. I have to warn you in advance, for those of you with small children, that my speech involves such exotic travel as to Omaha, Nebraska, and even more exotic, Las Vegas, Nevada, a few times. It involves some mystery and intrigue and a little bit of detective work and even George Washington. So how the heck does that all fit in? Well, you're about to find out. Let me ask you, and it's just a rhetorical question, you don't have to raise your hand or anything, but how many of you have a stamp or stamps and you think you have an expensive rarity or just a rare stamp, but you're not positive of what you have? Do you have a fake? Do you have a forgery? Do you have a facsimile? Or do you have the authentic thing? Do you have a reprint? What the heck do you have? And you don't know, and you don't know who to ask, and you want to find out. Well, that's kind of where my story starts. About 4 years ago, I was in the same boat because I was getting serious about stamps again. And I purchased a collection. Now, no worries, it wasn't from anybody that's in this room or that has been in this room as far as I know. But part of the collection was a box of U.S. stamps, and in it there were a lot of glassine envelopes, and they were marked with the Scott catalog number. Now, I took them home, and I was going through them at my kitchen table, and I came across a bunch of the Washington Franklin stamps from like the 1910s. And if you're not familiar with those, you probably are, but if you're not, this is kind of a generally depicted one that I'm talking about. So this is a 2-cent George Washington. Well, some of these, they made millions or hundreds of millions of, and some of them they didn't make as many of, or they weren't in use as much. So some of these are worth practically nothing, and some of these could be worth thousands of dollars, depending on the condition and the types and things like that. Well, I was sitting at my kitchen table, going through those, and I had my stamp catalog, my Brookman catalog. I had my collection, and I noticed in my collection I had a space for a 491. And to be honest, because there's so many varieties of these, at the time, I was just a little bit overwhelmed. And I didn't want to take the time to really go through and learn about them and things like that. And so, but I looked in the Brookman catalog to see what the heck these 491 things were. And if you remember back in the 70s and 80s, Saturday Night Live, Rosanna, Dana, I thought I was going to die because I looked in the Brookman catalog and it said the stamp, one of these used stamps was worth $725. And I'm like, what? So of course, all these emotions and thoughts came over me, and the first thing I thought of was, are these really the stamp? I mean, come on. I mean, how many of these do you see? Like, someone just threw these in there and said, oh yeah, these are the rare ones. Oh yeah. And then I thought, the second thought was, well, what if someone really did know what they were doing? What if they are real? And I thought I could keep one for my collection and as a reference. I could sell the rest, and then guess what I'd do? I'd buy more stamps. That's my daughters. But then I thought, well, that sounds good. But then I felt a little bit maybe like, I don't know, Moses in the Old Testament, like, who am I, Lord? I'm just this lowly stamp collector. Like, who's gonna believe me that these are $4.91? I'm like, I can't sell them unless I know for sure, right, what they are to have integrity. So I was really at a loss. But it was like this little voice came on in my head and said, hello, Steve. In a few months, you're going to Omaha for the big national stamp show. Because my wife, Carolyn Marks, and my daughters, Katie and Anna Joy Marks, they're cachet makers, and so they had a table at the cachet makers boards. So I thought, okay, I have a plan. So the day of the show, thankfully I remembered to bring them. But the day of the show, I believe it was a Thursday afternoon. I'd never been to a stamp show that big, so it was a little bit overwhelming. So I just wanted to kind of see everything quickly. So I was walking up and down the aisles, kind of like, stamps, wow, stamps. You know, I was just overwhelmed, right? Well, thankfully, I saw a booth and it said PSE, Professional Stamp Expert, Henderson, Nevada. Well, Henderson's a suburb of Las Vegas. And there was a man sitting there, and I introduced myself, found out his name is Scott Murphy. And Scott is the president, co-owner, and this is one of the senior experts at PSE. He was there along with his wife, and I just explained to him real briefly, hey, I've got these stamps, I don't know what I have. Can you help me out? Can I bring them like tomorrow? And he said, sure. And he explained he would help me. And if I wanted to, I could submit the stamps to PSE, and they would either grade them for me or authenticate them and issue a certificate to me so I knew what I would have. And for that, they would charge 5% of the catalog value. So I said, well, that's fair enough. And I went on my merry way. So the next morning, my daughter Katie, who was 7 or 8 years old at that time, and I went back to see him. She had a lot of patience because I was probably there for an hour and a half or something like that. But I sat down with Scott, showed him the envelopes that said $4.91. And let me ask everybody a question. Have you ever seen the show Pawn Stars from Las Vegas, right, where they bring in stuff? It's like, oh yeah, here's this book, 1776, and look, George Washington signed it and give me $10 million, please. Well, of course, they have to have an expert come in, and it's a great show, but it's all staged, and the expert knows what they're going to come in and look at, so they can research, right? They got to have time to research if needed. So, but I sat down with Scott. He took out this stamp kind of viewing pad, looked at the envelope. Oh, you think you have 491s? And he proceeded to explain everything about the 491, that it was per pen, and it didn't have a watermark, and it was a type 2. And it was a type 2 because of the scroll and the toga, and there's a line, getting a line by the cheek, and this, that, and the other thing. And honestly, I felt like I was on Pawn Stars. I was just like, what the heck? Like he had no idea what I was going to bring him. He didn't have a cheat sheet in front of him. He didn't have a heads up. He told me, oh, the Scott catalog value is $800. And I was like, how does this guy know so much? So, but again, stamp experts, right? So I was amazed. He took out the stamps, put them all face up, put them all the same way so he could look at them. He took out his little loop, his little magnifier. It was like a jeweler, right? So he's looking at each one for maybe 15 seconds to a minute, and it was like this kind of, nope, nope, ooh, maybe. He's like, the maybe is because I can't see everything because of the cancellation. And then he said, yes. And I had hope. At least the front match, I had hope. But when all is said and done, he took the pile of yeses, flipped them over, put them in his watermark fluid he uses, checked for watermarks. If he saw one, he would point it out. Like, see that? That's a little part of the P. That's a little part of the S. If he saw a thin, he would show me, etc., etc. The good news is, out of 30 stamps, all of them were type 2. Now, some of them were the 454 because they had watermarks, but the 454 is still worth, I think, like $12 or $15 or something like that. So not a bad stamp, certainly, but when all is said and done, 12 of them, he said, whoever did this knew what they were doing because they were all type 2, but 12 of them, he's like, I'm confident they're 491s.
Wow.
But, he said, you have to submit them, and just because I think they're 491s, it might go to another expert, and we all kind of have to agree that they're the 491 before we issue the certificate. So personally, that made me feel really good that they had integrity, and it wasn't just someone saying, you know, yes, I'm an expert. It was multiple people that were going to be involved in this process, so it made me feel good. Well, sure enough, I submitted them. By the way, about a month later or so, I got them back in the mail. So here's an example of the certificate, and here's an example of the stamp. You can see it's a picture of the stamp, right? So I got these all back in the mail, and I believe it was 12 that ended up being 491s. Of the 12, I kept one for my collection. I sold the rest to a couple of collectors, and also some very well-known dealers that you can find like in Glen Stamp News and things like that. The coolest thing of all this is I sold one to Mystic Stamp Company. And that's really personal to me because when I was 8 years old, I think I was telling Scott, that's about when I started collecting stamps. And my dad and I would buy stamps all the time from Mystic. So unfortunately, my dad passed just a few months before this, but just to be able to sell a stamp back to them was pretty cool, like from my point of view and my experience. So really cool. But then I told Scott, as I was sitting there, that I would be going to Las Vegas in a month. It was a pre-planned trip. He said, well, sounds good. Let me know before you come and we'll get together and I'll show you the office and what we do. So sure enough, I got to meet him. I also got to meet a guy named Cash, who I'll talk about in a minute. But Cash is also one of the co-owners, a stamp expert, and he does an internet podcast that's really, really cool. And so I got to meet them, and I had a buffet with all sorts of other stamp dealers down there. And then a few days later, I got to go to their office, and it was like nothing. I mean, it was like stamp heaven, like philatelic heaven. Just to see, like his office, Scott's office, just wall-to-wall reference books, stamps everywhere. I got to see some cool stuff, like Confederate sheets of stamps. I got to see forged forever stamps. By the way, there's tons of forged. They sell them all the time on the website, so be very leery if you see like large quantities cheap. They're made in China, and there's a long story behind them, but he had some because he was doing a project, I think, with someone, but really cool. But then I also got to sit in on their podcast that they do. And on that sheet, it has the information on that, but about every Friday, they do a podcast. And it ranges from real beginner things like new stamps coming out to real super advanced stuff like how do you know when you have a zebra and how do you know when you have a regum stamp and everything in between. They just got done talking about inflation, like talking about the 70s and 80s when there was inflation and what happened to stamps. The podcast is very interesting. Like I like to tell people, it's like anything else. Sometimes it's really great, in my opinion. Sometimes it's good, in my opinion. And sometimes it's still way better than listening to negative news and everything else over there, right? But I love to put it on. It's fun to put on when you're doing stamps, because it kind of sets the atmosphere and you hear about stamps. And I can't even tell you how much education I've got just from listening to these podcasts. And they're free. You don't have to sign up for them. You don't even have to give them your name, nothing. You go to a website, you click on it, and listen to it. There's like 320 of them. You can go back and listen to ones from a couple years ago. Very, very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. They say you can join if you send them $10, but really they're just looking to cover their costs, and you don't have to do that if you don't want to. You know, it's free. You can listen to it as long as you want. But very cool resource for you no matter where you are in the stamp world. Scott and Cash also talked to me and told me about these books. They have 3 different ones, but the Philatelic Book of Secrets, the black books. And there's all sorts of things in these books. One's just on colors, but here's grading and expertising Scott 10, 11, 25, 26, and varieties. Just a lot of, most of this is like intermediate to advanced stuff. But even if you're a beginner collector, it's a great way to get education. You can get these on their website. I think they're like $15 or something. I mean, I have learned so much, I can't even, I feel like I got a PhD in stamp collecting from all this stuff in the past few years. So that's a resource that you can use also. I got the opportunity to go back about 4 months ago. This time I went with my sister, because my sister was really curious, even though she's not a stamp collector. She's like, I gotta see this operation. So we went back. By the way, each time I go back, I brought Scott more stamps to look at. I've gotten several more 491s somehow. I found them. Got them expertized. Last time I went back with my sister, I got a Z-Grill authenticated, which is a rare grill. I had another Z-Grill, or so I thought, and it ended up being a forgery. So Scott took the time, showed me that. But he's gone way the extra mile for me. He spent a couple hours with my sister and I. It is so amazing because this company has literally seen every U.S. stamp ever issued. I don't care if there was a variety where there was one issued, they have literally seen it. Scott told me they have authenticated, I think he said 13 upside down Jennies they've issued certificates for. So it is absolutely amazing. So just the technology that they literally have machines that cost thousands of dollars that you can put a stamp, it's like a copier, and you can look at a stamp very close up and see if there were forgeries, things like that. The good part of all this is you don't have to go to Las Vegas to take advantage of their grading service, or if you're not sure what you have, you can text Cash, who I mentioned that does the radio show. I put his number on that sheet, and it's fine if you know his number because he mentioned it on the podcast, so that's why I put it on there. But you can text him, send him a picture of the stamp, and say, hey, I think I have a blah, blah, blah. What do you think of this? He'll look at it. Sometimes they charge $5 to do that just for their time, but he can give you a heads up whether or not it's worth submitting. So it saves you a lot of time and energy, and then of course, if he thinks it's worth submitting, you might really have a stamp worth something. So take advantage of that. I also put Scott Murphy's contact information as far as just the office number and also the office email, and put their website on there, etc. But I highly recommend it if you need someone, a resource to look at your stamps, check them out. There are other grading services that are great too, like the APS has one. I've never used them, but I know they're extremely reputable as well. I just have experience with PSE, but they have really gone the extra mile for me. They've been very encouraging to me. And Scott Murphy actually was in Lynn's Stamp News as a nominee for one of the top philatelists that's living out of, I think they had 100 and some nominees, and he's one of them on there because he has really helped a lot of people. So I don't work for PSE, I don't make any money, I'm gonna do a disclaimer, but just a fantastic company. By chance, does anyone know Cash or Scott Murphy or PSE or listen to the podcast or anything like that?
Is PSE the same organization that does baseball cards?
No, that's a different one. That's PSA. Are you thinking of PSA? I think. Yep, that's PSA. But PSE, they do mostly U.S. stamps. They do like Confederate stamps with Patricia Kaufman, Pat Kaufman, if you know who that is. She's an expert in Confederate stamps. But they also will do like some foreign stamps. But if they can't authenticate them, they'll guide you to someone that can. So does anyone have any questions?
How long is the turnaround for exercising?
So they have different levels of service. They do have like a rush one, and of course you pay more for that. I'm not sure how much that is, but it's on their website, gradingmatters.com. But in general, I think I usually experience like a 4 to 6 weeks type of thing. It depends a little bit. And by the way, one thing that's really cool too about just, it speaks to their integrity and how smart of a business model they have. He showed me, like, because I've toured, I've been there twice, that when they get stamps in it, and there's a video camera there. So nobody can say, like, he told me the story of someone that submitted stamps and then said, oh, I sent you this stamp, and I can't remember what it was, but it was a very expensive stamp. And he's like, no, it wasn't in the package. And the guy, oh, no, I sent it. And he sent them the camera. Well, then the guy found it was in his copy. So, because then you don't have a he said, she said type of thing, and then they do the same thing when they mail it back to you. Because the 491, yeah, it's a great stamp, whatever, but they do stamps tens of thousands that they do. not small potatoes too. They do stamps for auction houses that are really popular. And by the way, keep looking for treasures, because I did meet a guy, and I know that this isn't the exact story, so don't quote me, but I met a guy down there, and it's a true story. He bought a box of stamps for $9 at a show several years ago, and he kind of put them aside, and he was looking through them, and there's something called, I think it's the Shermack coil, like coil printing machines.
Yeah.
And some of them are really rare, right? And he had one, and he got it authenticated, put it in a New York auction, and sold it, I want to say $80,000 to $100,000.
Oh.
And he was at the show, he told me the story, he was at the show, and he said there was a guy in front of him in like shorts that looked all raggedy and homeless, he said, and the guy bought it. And several more, he couldn't believe it, like, this guy has all this money. So you don't know. You don't know, but if you have something you think would be worthwhile, talk to them. They'll help me. Like, I'd love to hear feedback, because they're very entertaining. I promise you, you'll be entertained. But tell me, because I'm just curious what people think. So, any other questions?
Did you have handouts that you didn't get over here?
I did, but I don't think I had enough. I can bring them next time, or if you want to talk to me,
All right.
like I said, I'd be happy to email or text, to be honest. But thank you for your time. I'm really passionate about this because it really has helped me, honestly.
Well, thank you.